The Mandan are a Native American tribe residing in North Dakota. They are enrolled in the 3 affiliated tribes of the Fort Berthold Reservation. About half of the Mandan still reside in the area of the reservation, the rest reside around the United States and in Canada. The Mandan historically lived along the banks of the Missouri River and 2 of its tributaries, the Heart and Knife Rivers, in present-day North and South Dakota. Speakers of Mandan, a Siouan language, developed a settled, agrarian culture. They established permanent villages featuring large, round, earth lodges, some 40 feet in diameter, surrounding a central plaza. While the bison was key to the daily life of the Mandan, they also farmed and actively traded goods with other Great Plains tribes. Population. The Mandan population was 3,600 in the early 18th century. In 1836, there were over 1,600 full-blood Mandans, but this number was estimated to have dropped to 125 by 1838. In the 1990s, 6,000 people were enrolled in the 3 affiliated tribes. In the 2010 census, 1,171 people reported Mandan ancestry. 365 of them were full-bloods, and 806 had partial ancestry. Synonymy. The English name Mandan is derived from the French-Canadian explorer Pierre Gautier Sieur de la Vérendrye, who heard it as Mantan from his Assiniboine guides in 1738. He had previously heard the Earth Lodge peoples referred to by the Cree as Uashipuans, the Sioux who go underground. The Assiniboine Siouan speakers. Nearby Siouan speakers had exonyms similar to Mantan in the languages, for instance, Teton Mawatani, Janktani Mawatani, Jankton Mawatani Her Mawatani, Dakota Mawatana Mawatada, etc. The Mandan have used differing autonyms to refer to themselves. Ruwakaki, men, people, before 1837. Waitita Heart, East Village, late 19th century. Ruata, ourselves, our people. This is the term the people now use. The Mandan probably used Ruwakaki to refer to a general tribal entity. Later, this word fell to disuse and instead 2 divisions names were used, Nuwata Arupta. Later, the term Ruata was extended to refer to a general tribal entity. The name Miatan, as recorded by Ferdinand van der Veer Hayden in 1862, reportedly means people on the riverbank, but this may be a folk etymology. Various other terms and alternate spellings that occur in the literature including Mayatana, Mayatani, Mawadani, Muada Delta I, Huatanas, Mandani, Watani, Mantan, Mantans, Mandan, Mandan, Mandians, Mordan, Meandans, Lesmandals, Mitutahak, Nu Makshi, Ruwa, KSI, Wilwatan, Mevatan, Mevataneo. Gloria Jehoda in Trail of Tears states that they also call themselves the Pheasant People. George Catlin states the Mandan's language. The Mandan language belongs to the Siouan language family. It was initially thought to be closely related to the languages of the Hidatsa and the Crow. However, since the Mandan language has been in contact with Hidatsa and Crow for many years, the exact relationship between Mandan and other Siouan languages has been obscured. For this reason, linguists classify Mandan most often as a separate branch of the Siouan family. Mandan has 2 main dialects, Nubter and Nueter. Only the Nubter variety survived into the 20th century, and all speakers were bilingual in Hidatsa. Linguist Mauricio Mixco of the University of Utah has been involved in fieldwork with remaining speakers since 1993. As of 1999, there were only 6 fluent speakers of Mandan still alive. As of 2010, programs in local schools encourage students learning the language. The Mandan and the language received much attention from European Americans, in part because the lighter skin color caused speculation they were of European origin. In the 1830s, Prince Maximilian of Wied spent more time recording Mandan over all other Siouan languages and additionally prepared a comparison list of Mandan and Welsh words. The theory of the Mandan-Welsh connection, now discounted, was also supported by George Catlin. Mandan has different grammatical forms that depend on gender of the addressee. Questions asked of men must use the suffix -sar, while the suffix -arar is used when asking of women. Likewise, the indicative suffix is -os when addressing men and -ari when addressing women, and also for imperatives, -ta, -ra. Mandan, like many other North American languages, has elements of sound symbolism in the vocabulary. Upper second sound often denotes smallness, less intensity denotes mediumness, x denotes largeness, greater intensity, sire yellow, sire tawny, zire brown, sro tinkle, xro rattle. History, origins and early history. The exact origins and early history of the Mandan is unknown. Early studies by linguists gave evidence that the Mandan language may have been closely related to the language of the Ho-Chunk Winnebago people of present-day Wisconsin. Scholars theorize they may have settled in the Wisconsin area at one time. This idea is possibly confirmed in their oral history, which refers to the having come from an eastern location near a lake. Ethnologists and scholars studying the Mandan subscribe to the theory that, like other Siouan-speaking people, they originated in the area of the mid-Mississippi River and the Ohio River valleys in present-day Ohio. If this was the case, the Mandan would have migrated north towards the Missouri River Valley and its tributary the Heart River in present-day North Dakota. That is where Europeans first encountered the historical tribe. This migration is believed to have occurred possibly as early as the 7th century, but probably between 1000 CE and the 13th century, after the cultivation of maize was adopted. After their arrival on the banks of the Heart River, the Mandan constructed 9 villages, 2 on the east side of the river and 7 on the west side. At some point during this time, the Hidatsa people also moved into the region. Mandan tradition states that the Hidatsa were a nomadic tribe until their encounter with the Mandan, who taught them to build stationary villages and cultivate agriculture. The Hidatsa continued to maintain amicable relations with the Mandan and constructed villages north of them on the Knife River. European encounter. The Coatisoic, mentioned in a 1736 letter by Jesuit Jean-Pierre Aulneau, are identified as Mandans. Aulneau was killed before his planned expedition to visit the Mandans could take place. The first encounter with Europeans occurred with the visit of the French-Canadian trader Sieur de La Vérendrye in 1738. It is estimated that at the time of his visit, 15,000 Mandan resided in the 9 villages on the Heart River. Horses were acquired by the Mandan in the mid-18th century from the Apache and were used for transportation and hunting. The horses helped with the expansion of Mandan hunting territory onto the plains. The encounter with the French in the 18th century created a trading link between the French and Native Americans of the region. The Mandan served as middlemen in the trade in furs, horses, guns, crops and buffalo products. Spanish merchants and officials in St. Louis explored the Missouri and strengthened relations with the Mandan in an effort to discourage trade in the region by the English and the Americans. The Spanish sought to establish direct overland communication between Santa Fe and St. Louis. In 1796 the Mandan were visited by the Welsh explorer John Evans, who was hoping to find proof that the language contained Welsh words. Evans had arrived in St. Louis 2 years prior, and after being imprisoned for a year, was hired by Spanish authorities to lead an expedition to chart the upper Missouri. Evans spent the winter of 1796–97 with the Mandan but found no evidence of any Welsh influence. In July 1797 he wrote to Dr. Samuel Jones, thus having explored and charted the Missouri for 1,800 miles, and by my communications with the Indians this side of the Pacific Ocean from 35 to 49 degrees of latitude, I am able to inform you that there is no such people as the Welsh Indians. By 1804, when Lewis and Clark visited the tribe, the number of Mandan had been greatly reduced by smallpox epidemics and warring bands of Assiniboine, Lakota and Arikara. The 9 villages consolidated into 2 villages. The Lewis and Clark expedition met with such hospitality in the upper Missouri River villages that the expedition stopped there for the winter. In honor of the hosts, the expedition dubbed the settlement they constructed Fort Mandan. It was here that Lewis and Clark first met Sacagawea, a Shoshone woman who had been captured. Sacagawea assisted the expedition with information and translating skills as they traveled westward towards the Pacific Ocean. Upon the return to the Mandan villages, Lewis and Clark took the Mandan chief Shefeki with them to Washington to meet with President Thomas Jefferson. In 1812, Chief Shefeki was killed in a battle with Hidatso. In 1833, artist George Catlin visited the Mandan near Fort Clark. Catlin painted and drew scenes of Mandan life as well as portraits of chiefs, including forebears Amata Tohp. His skill at rendering so impressed forebears that he invited Catlin as the first man of European descent to be allowed to watch the Okipa ceremony. The winter months of 1833 and 1834 brought Prince Maximilian of Wied-Neuwied and Swiss artist Karl Bodmer to stay with the Mandan. Speculation about pre-Columbian European contact. 18th century reports about characteristics of Mandan lodges, religion and occasional physical features among tribal members, such as bluey and gray eyes along with lighter hair coloring, stirred speculation about the possibility of pre-Columbian European contact. Catlin believed the Mandan were the Welsh Indians of folklore, descendants of Prince Madoc and his followers who emigrated to America from Wales in about 1170. This view was popular at the time but has since been disputed by the bulk of scholarship. Hjalmar Holand had proposed that interbreeding with Norse survivors might explain the blonde Indians among the Mandan on the upper Missouri River, but in a multidisciplinary study of the Kensington runestone, anthropologist Alice Beck-Kehoe dismissed as tangential to the runestone issue. This and other historical references suggesting pre-Columbian contacts with outsiders, such as the Ho-Chunk story about an ancestral hero, Red Horn, and his encounter with red-haired giants. Archaeologist Ken Fader has stated that none of the material evidence that would be expected from a Viking presence in and travel through the American Midwest exists. Smallpox epidemic of 1837–38. The Mandan were first plagued by smallpox in the 16th century and had been hit by similar epidemics every few decades. Between 1837 and 1838, another smallpox epidemic swept the region. In June 1837, an American fur company steamboat traveled westward up the Missouri River from St. Louis. Its passengers and traders aboard infected the Mandan, Hidatsa and Arikara tribes. There were approximately 1,600 Mandan living in the two villages at the time. The disease effectively destroyed the Mandan settlements. Almost all the tribal members, including the chief forebears, died. Estimates of the number of survivors vary from only 27 individuals to up to 150, with some sources placing the number at 125. The survivors banded together with the nearby Hidatsa in 1845 and created like a fishhook village. Mandan chief forebears reportedly stated, "A set of black-hearted dogs. They have deceived me. Them that I always considered as brothers, has turned out to be my worst enemies." Francis Chardon, in his journal at Fort Clark 1834–1839, wrote that the gross venters swear vengeance against all the whites. As they say, the smallpox was brought here by the SB. In the earliest detailed study of the event in the American fur trade of the Far West, Hiram M. Chittenden blamed the American Fur Company for the epidemic. Oral tradition of the affected tribes continue to claim that whites were to blame for the disease. R.G. Robertson, in his book Rotting Face, Smallpox and the American Indian, places blame on Captain Pratt of St. Peter's for failing to quarantine once the epidemic broke out, stating that while not guilty of premeditated genocide, but he was guilty of contributing to the deaths of thousands of innocent people. The law calls his offense criminal negligence. Yet in light of all the deaths, the almost complete annihilation of the Mandans, and the terrible suffering the region endured, the label criminal negligence is benign, hardly befitting an action that had such horrendous consequences. Others who have written about intentional communication of smallpox to Native Americans during the 1836–40 epidemic include Anne F. Ramanovsky in 1987 and Ward Churchill in 1992. According to Ramanovsky, the variola major can be transmitted through contaminated articles such as clothing or blankets. In the 19th century, the U.S. Army sent contaminated blankets to Native Americans, especially Plains groups, to control the Indian problem. Churchill agreed, asserting that in 1837 at Fort Clark the United States Army deliberately infected Mandan Indians by distributing blankets that had been exposed to smallpox, but he additionally alleged that the blankets were taken from a military infirmary in St. Louis, that smallpox vaccine was withheld from the Indians, and that an army doctor had advised the infected Indians to disperse, further spreading the disease and causing over 100,000 deaths. After an investigation of Churchill's writings and sources by the University of Colorado at Boulder, the Standing Committee concluded, "We do not find academic misconduct with respect to his general claim that the U.S. Army deliberately spread smallpox to Mandan Indians at Fort Clark in 1837 using infected blankets." Early accounts of what was said by Indians involved in that situation and certain native oral traditions provide some basis for that interpretation. Churchill was criticized, however, for not properly citing his more extreme details and not mentioning native oral sources in any of his published essays about Fort Clark. Another frequently recounted story is that an Indian snuck aboard the St. Peter and stole a blanket from an infected passenger, thus starting the epidemic. The many variations of this account have also been criticized by both historians and contemporaries as fiction, a fabrication intended to assuage the guilt of white settlers. The blanket affair was created afterward and is not to be credited, notes B.A. Mann. Late 19th and the 20th centuries, the Mandan joined with the Arikara in 1862. By this time, like a fishhook village had become a major center of trade in the region. By the 1880s, though, the village was abandoned. With the second half of the 19th century there was a gradual decrease in the holdings of the three affiliated tribes. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 recognized 12 million acres of land in the territory owned jointly by these tribes. With the creation of the Fort Berthold Reservation by executive order on April 12, 1870, the federal government recognized the holdings as only being 8 million acres. On July 1, 1880, another executive order deprived the tribes of 7 million acres lying outside the boundaries of the reservation. With the arrival of the 20th century, the government seized more land, and by 1910, the reservation had shrunk to a mere 900,000 acres. This land is located in Dunn, McKenzie, McLean, Mercer, Mountrail and Ward counties in North Dakota. With the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act, the Mandan officially merged with the Hidatsa and the Arikara into the three affiliated tribes, known as the Mandan, Hidatsa and Arikara Nation. In 1951, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began construction of Garrison Dam on the Missouri River. This dam created Lake Sakakawea, which flooded portions of the Fort Berthold Reservation including the villages of Fort Berthold and Elbow Woods as well as a number of other villages. The former residents of these villages were moved and a new town was established for them. While a new town was constructed for the displaced tribal members, much damage was done to the social and economic foundations of the reservation. The flooding claimed approximately 1/4 of the reservation's land. This land contained some of the most fertile agricultural land upon which the agricultural economy had been constructed. In addition, the flooding claimed the sites of historic villages and archaeological sites.